if your brother sins, rebuke him. And if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times in the day and turns 7 times and says, I repent, you must forgive him. But what do you do with, in this case, a father who doesn't recognize any wrong that's been done and so isn't repenting, isn't asking for forgiveness? Does forgiveness make any sense in that situation? How do you navigate that? There are at least two other categories, biblical categories that need to be stirred in here besides forgiveness. One is, I'll call it enemy love. And when I say enemy love, I'm not just thinking about a declared enemy, and I've got this awful enemy, but rather people like spouses or sons or daughters or dads in this case, who in the moment are acting like an adversary. I mean, they are hurting you the way an enemy would hurt you. They're not your enemies in that sense, in the big sense, but rather they are in that moment acting with enmity toward you. So the Bible doesn't just talk about forgiveness there. It talks about enemy love. Jesus said, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. And Peter picked it up in chapter 3, verse 9, 1 Peter. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. Now, the second category, besides enemy love and forgiveness, is forbearance or endurance. Colossians 3:12. Put on, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, meekness, patience, bearing with one another, forbearing one another, or enduring. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13:7, I think, love bears all things, believes all things, and hopes all things, endures all things. So love doesn't just forgive when another person repents, and it doesn't just bless when we're hurt, but it bears with, it endures, it forbears. And both Peter and James call that a covering of a multitude of sins. Love covers a multitude of sins. It just covers them and endures them. They don't go away. You're just enduring them and you're covering them. Now, at this point in our conversation with the man I'm talking about, it became clear that one of the main obstacles, I felt it, he felt it, to actually acting this way, forgiving, forbearing, returning good for evil, blessing those who hurt us, is that if we do this, if we really return good for evil, not the kind of manipulative way that hopes to really draw attention to the other person's guilt, but I'm talking about a really authentic blessing, treating with kindness and hope from the heart. If we do that, very few people, if anybody, will know that we've been hurt. And if we're returning good for evil, then we're not moping around. Our countenance is not cast down. Our shoulders are not shrugged. We haven't withdrawn into a silent funk. We're not drawing attention to our woundedness. We're acting in a cheerful, hopeful, gracious way, and nobody will have any idea that we've been insulted or put down or wounded or cheated. And here's the rub. Almost everything in my sinful soul cries out against that. We want people to know that we've been hurt. We want people to pity us, or at least sympathize with us, or recognize that our effort to return good for evil is a noble effort in the face of much difficulty. Good grief, if nobody knows, shoot, then what? And you can see what's going on. And perhaps, most of all, we want the person who has wounded us to be aware that they have wounded us. And we don't want to act in a way that looks as if they didn't hurt us, that looks as if it makes light of the fact that they wounded us or insulted us or put us down or criticized us in an inappropriate way or cheated on us or something. And all of this is a huge obstacle to obeying the Lord when he says, do not return evil for evil, but bless those who do you harm. And here's the key. The key is how important and how satisfying to us is the fact that God knows we've been hurt, that God understands and God attends to us. God feels with us. He is a merciful high priest. Is that enough? What this showed me was how deeply my heart tends to be oriented on other people more than it's oriented on God. Our great need, my great need, is that God be more real to me than other people are. When God sees us returning good for evil, he knows everything. He knows we've been insulted or treated unjustly or cheated or whatever. He knows it. And he's sympathetic and he's attentive. And he sees that we are returning good for evil. When harm has been done to us, he sees that we are obeying him. He sees that we're loving our adversary. And 1 Peter 2:19 says, this is a gracious thing with God when we suffer unjustly and return good for evil. God delights in it. We're pleasing God at that moment. And the key passage that I think we have to come to terms with is 1 Peter 2:23. When Jesus was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself, his cause, to him who judges justly. Is it enough for God to know our sorrow, for God to know our pain, for God to know our disappointment, our frustration? Can we hand our cause entirely over to God? Can we move forward treating others better than they treat us, even if it means only God knows and nobody else? That's how real God has to become to us.